Anthropology says that we evolved from a common ancestor with chimps between 5 and 8 million years ago. Somewhere in there was a common ancestor, and humans and chimps branched into their separate species of today. That's what anthropology and zoology and all of that says. However, when geneticists in the middle 1980s rather began to look at mitochondrial DNA and clocking it backwards because they feel that it's something that can give them a timeline on humanity. When they did that, they found that we were about 200,000 years old, not between 8 and 5 million, only 200,000. Mm-hmm. So that's where our species begins as we are now, as we are today. So science then was in a real quandary because the anthropologists and the geneticists just did not agree on this timeline. So an answer had to be devised to explain away what the geneticists had found and still keep the idea of evolution intact. So what they came up with was what's called the bottleneck, the genetic bottleneck, in which they say sometime prior to 200,000 years ago, all of humankind up to that point in the world mm-hmm. was decimated by some unknown kind of catastrophe, leaving only a few breeding pair alive, and those few breeding pair happened to be within reach of each other, so they could continue to have sex and procreate. So that's just, it's an impossible scenario. Species can have genetic flaws, genetic defects. That's not an issue. They don't have nearly as many as we do. We have over 4,000 and counting genetic defects in our gene pool. By genetic defect, there are any number of genetic disorders. Down syndrome is a mm-hmm. very common one. Spina bifida is one that everybody knows about. Right. Tay-Sachs disease. There's just lots of them. Right. And any one of those 4,000 can show up in any couple because each of us carry about 200 of those mm-hmm. 4,000 in our gene code. Mm-hmm. Now, in other words, not every person walks around with 4,000 genetic disorders. Mm-hmm. We walk around with about 200 each, but collectively in the gene pool itself, there are over 4,000. So it's a function of who you and your partner, when you have children, your 200 approximately disorders, and then whether or not any of your children are going to express any of those.
So what would that figure be in chimps, Lloyd? That equivalent
it would
number?
be considerably less. I mean, chimps, for example, gorillas, alligators. I mean, a lot of species have, for example, the genetic defect that causes albinism, causes albinos. So you can have albino chimps, albino gorillas, albino humans, albino alligators, albino birds, a lot of things, all right? So, but that doesn't kill you. That just makes you an albino. It doesn't kill you. So that passes on, you see. But with humans, there are a couple of dozen of our genetic defects that kill you early on, so before you reach puberty, so that you right. can't possibly have passed it on. So where do these come from, and then how do they get passed into the whole gene pool?
So it's suggesting that it's been messed with, basically.
There's that evidence, and then there's just the physical evidence of our genome showing very clearly that the second and third chromosome in humans that is in primates has been fused. I mean, genetically fused, so that its telomeres on its ends are cut off of the second and the third, and they've been put together in such a way that they still function. And that's extremely unlikely to have occurred naturally. Now, science says, yes, it does, but really it doesn't. And understand that there's as much genetic tampering with domesticated plants and animals as there is with human beings. So this whole plethora of things that we just accept as natural to the earth, were not. They were created here.
And the Anunnaki that the stone tablets speak of were supposedly here possibly a few 100,000 years before man was created. So they
Right.
were maybe occupying our planet for whatever reason.
Well,
Is that?
about the tablets say about 350 to 400,000 years ago, so they could have as much as 150 to 200,000 years here before they felt a need to create us. Yes.
And tell us what that need was, Lloyd.
The need to create us was that they were few and they had a big job to do. They were collecting gold. They needed a lot of gold to repair their atmosphere. Again, this is according to the writings of the Sumerians, to correct their atmosphere, which had been damaged in their rise to a high technology. And so they need gold, it turns out, is the thing we'll need to repair our atmosphere with when the day ever comes. Gold is a wonderful reflector, and it reflects harmful rays, but it's also a good insulator as well. So particulated gold in the form of like talcum powder, blown up into the stratosphere so it'll float over the surface of the air and stay up for quite a while. That's just what they needed, so they came to get it.
But Homo sapiens themselves, we were to be their servants or their slaves.
We were created to be their slaves and their servants to do their mining, to do, just take care of them. They're like 600 people, 600 beings here living on Earth doing all this work. They need help. They need, and most of them are male, so they need help and they need women. So, they make your own kind of thing.
So do you go along with the theory that they actually kind of suppressed certain abilities in themselves and used their own genetics when they created man?
Well, I don't think they created anything within themselves, but they took their genes and then they did, I think, manipulate to make the slave and the servant. They took what they gave us. I mean, I think we're essentially them. We're not primates. We're essentially them.
Right.
So in doing that, they dumbed us down. You don't want your slave or your servant to be as intelligent as you are by any stretch. You don't want it even as close, or live as long. Exactly, that's another thing. You want them to be expendable. You want them to be parts of the machine. So when you come down to our intelligence, they had to really dumb us down. If we've got their brains in our heads, and it's clear that we do, we have a brain that's totally unlike any other higher primate, totally in every way. So let's assume we have their brain in our head. If we do, and I believe that we do, then we have a phenomenal tool in our heads. So they just denied access to us of most of the firepower that they were giving us. So that while we sit here talking, you and I, and we think, well, we're really smart guys, the fact is that compared to the Anunnaki, we're toadstools. I mean, we're just really, really bad. And you, I think, can prove that easily enough by looking at the work of savants and what savants can do. Savants are people that in the damage to their good part of their brains that you and I are using, they get an arrow of light, a shaft of light into the forbidden part. And the tear in the curtain that causes their mental disability, they get a light into the forbidden part. And that light into the forbidden part produces the phenomenal abilities of savants. And you've got over 100 savants that have been known and studied in history. We have several who are alive today, and they have these incredible abilities with music and art and sculpture and memory and just incredible works. So if there were one or two of those, you could write it off as a freak of nature. But since we're talking 100 plus, we have to look at that as a phenomena. And what that means is they are accessing parts of a brain that we have. If I could find a way, if I could drop that curtain that the Anunnaki put in my head, if you could drop your curtain, we would suddenly have all of the access that savants have and then some. They're only getting a narrow band of light. Imagine if you could access the whole thing that has to do with language and art and math. Yeah, we can just go on. They have the savants have such a wide range of skills. We could all have that, and I believe that in the next 50 to 100 years we'll get it because we're getting so sophisticated with our genetic manipulation. Once we get past the moral issues of making ourselves better, if you could say to a wealthy person, give me a few $1 million and I will produce a kid for you that will be the smartest human being that ever lived. Somebody's going to do it, and before you know it, we'll all be that way.
Really.